I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Yes, the ice storm is approaching. We'll dig into that in a moment. But I also wanted to let you know we have a really fantastic show for you tonight with other stories as well. For example, we're going to have the latest on the recount of Washington's 3rd Congressional District. We're going to have the discovery of a brand new species of cockroach. Who knew? And more from our exit interview with Oregon Governor Kate Brown, including some fun outtakes like this one. So we saw it unprecedented with the Republicans. Actually, it wasn't unprecedented, as you well know, because I believe that Kate Brown at one point led a walkout.
No, I didn't.
No?
I was in the House, I was in the Senate. But good, close.
Darn it.
No.
We'll have more on the lighter moments in a little bit and the serious discussion that followed that. But first, the ice storm. That is tonight's big story. Now, you know, when Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino joins us at the top of the story, there is some serious weather that's either happening now or it's on the way. Hold on, Matt, it's not your turn yet. Matt, the ice is an obvious concern as we're getting going, but it's going to be super cold too, right, Matt?
It really is, Pat, and that is a big concern as well. Regardless of the ice, the wind chills themselves will be very, very dangerous. But it's the ice that's grabbing most of the attention for good reason. It's going to make travel really difficult, if not next to impossible, as we go into tomorrow night and into Friday morning. We're below freezing already, where you won't get above freezing tomorrow. We won't reach 30 tomorrow. We may not even reach 25 tomorrow. Oof. Very dry air as well. And the east wind is just beginning to ramp up. It's 17 miles an hour now. The latest observations from the airport last hour is like 11 miles an hour. It's just going to keep increasing overnight tonight into tomorrow. So again, it is beginning to happen, even though there's nothing falling from the sky just yet. We'll talk temperatures for a bit, and we'll talk a little bit of weather history too. And we're going to talk about de-icing and flying, because a lot of people, it's terrible timing, Pat, as you well know. Just leave the weather out of it right now. Travel over the next couple of days, Thursday, Friday, before a Christmas weekend, is always a nightmare. Now we have a major storm to deal with here in the west, and then another major storm back in the east too. So temperatures right now already in the single digits over in Pendleton at 9 degrees there. And as we move north, Spokane is 2, Pullman is 9 below, Oof. And up in Seattle is 22. So this gives you an idea as to what's headed our way. We're still a relatively warm 31 in Vancouver and Portland. But this cold air is moving towards us, and it'll be doing nothing but getting colder overnight. I know you're going to say it always gets colder overnight, and yes, it usually does, but this is different. This is colder air advecting or moving in as we go into the nighttime hours. So let's talk a little bit of history. Some other Arctic events in Portland. Back in 2014, which is really the last time we got this cold, we had a snowfall, though. We had about 4 inches of snow, 3.8 to be exact, at the Portland airport. And back then, the high was 23. And the low was 19. That was on February 6th. That's through the middle of that event. That was our coldest high and our coldest low temperature. Now, just a couple years ago, February, around Valentine's Day of 2021, we had a significant ice storm in the Willamette Valley, especially the Mid-Valley, down around Salem, Oregon City, Canby. Areas like that had well over an inch of ice in some spots. But look at the temperatures then. We had a high of 30. That was our coldest high through that 3-day period, and a low of 24. So yes, certainly cold enough for ice, but not as cold as what we're dealing with over the next couple of days, when the high temperature will be as low as 21. That's the high temperature tomorrow, only about 21, and our lows in the teens, which would be even colder than what we did back in 2014. So for some perspective, that's the difference in temperatures. That was a snow event, 2014, major ice event, although we had snow in Portland back in February 2021. And then this is largely going to be a sleet and freezing rain event. The difference is not the temperatures that we're experiencing down here at ground level, but what's happening above us. We're going to have a warm layer that allows the snowflakes, and the precipitation starts to snow in the clouds, but that warm layer allows those snowflakes to melt into rain and then refreeze when they reach this frigid Arctic air that we're dealing with temperatures like that down here at the surface. So we mentioned travel on the roads. Let's mention travel in the air just a bit. Right now, no delays around the Northwest. All of our airports are doing just fine, which is what we would expect. The sky is clear. It's cold, but that's okay. Airplanes don't mind that. It's beginning to get windy, but it's not super windy just yet. And even down to the big hubs like Los Angeles and San Francisco, Vegas, Salt Lake City, we're not seeing any major delays here at all, which is great. That is going to change. It's also going to change around the rest of the country, which amazingly, not seeing any major delays just yet, but that's because that big storm, we're on the western edge of this Arctic air mass. There's going to be a big storm that forms on the eastern edge of this Arctic air mass. And it's really going to have a big impact on places like, let's put it this way, Chicago is going to have a very bad O'Hare day tomorrow and on Friday because of the delays that they're going to see at O'Hare. You like that one, Pat?
Yeah, very nice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At O'Hare Airport. So again, that's what's happening there. The question comes up, though, what about de-icers? And we've got some video for you on that. This was in Seattle, I believe, just the other day. And all the major airlines, Alaska and the rest of them, they de-ice their airplanes because they need to do that. The problem is ice is heavy, and the airplanes aren't designed to carry that extra weight. So they have to get the ice off the aircraft before they try to take off. The problem when you have heavy precipitation, especially heavy freezing rain, they can't keep up because there's only so much time after an airplane is de-iced before it has to take off. Otherwise, the ice just starts forming on it again, and they have to de-ice the airplane again. And I've actually been on an airplane when that's happened, where they de-iced it twice and then they took off. But when you have a lot of precipitation and a lot of airplanes, they just cannot keep up. That's not to even mention the work that the runway crews have to do to keep the runway safe. Then there's the problem of equipment. And by equipment, I mean the actual airplane. Taking off, as you well know, Pat, is easier than landing. And so if they can't land the planes, there are no planes here to take off with passengers. So you get into, it's a really complicated dance, and the airlines all have a lot of people that work on this that are very good at their jobs to keep things flowing and moving. But the weather just gums it all up and keeps it from moving. So that's the problem with air travel as we go into Thursday night. And especially on Friday, I expect to see some major issues around Portland and Seattle because of the ice that we're going to get over the next couple of days.
All right, thank you, Matt. And as it says on the screen, expect travel delays in the coming days.
There you go.
Well, you've probably heard the warnings all day long, but just in case you haven't, once the ice arrives, you probably ought to stay put if you can. The roads are likely going to be awful, and often the worst roads are right in your own neighborhood. Even on the highways and interstates, though, it can be pretty rough. The State Department of Transportation and the City of Portland have recently started using rock salt on the roads, which does help. Many states and big cities, especially in the Midwest and the East Coast, they've routinely used salt on snow and ice for decades. And now some are actually starting to get away from it because they're worried about the impact on the environment. In Oregon, we've been going the other way. So how did we get here? Oregon's Department of Transportation says they believe they used salt on the roads up until the 1950s, but can't find records about why it stopped. For years, ODOT and local agencies, including Portland, have avoided using salt during snow and ice. The big reason? It's bad for the environment.
All of that salt either stays on the road or washes off into the environment. It's not picked up. It's now part of our environment. Is that what people want?
Road salt hurts plant life on the ground and aquatic life as it washes into streams and rivers, and the effects build up over time. Lots of salt is also bad for your car.
My husband's from the Midwest, and I always heard, yeah, your car gets all, corroded because of all the salt on the roads.
And for roads and bridges. Salt's expensive to store, and it's expensive to fix damage caused by salt over several years. And that's why Oregon stayed away from it.
We have storm situations like this a handful of times each year. And so is it worth it? Is that trade-off worth it?
But as rare storms became more common, ODOT launched a pilot program in 2012 to test salt use at the border with California. It found salt effective for reducing crashes. It also found minimal soil contamination, but one stream did show elevated levels of salt. Then, on December 15th, 2016, a storm that we called Snowmageddon descended on the Portland area. Here's what the opening of our newscast sounded like at 11 o'clock that night.
A December snowstorm snarls traffic, stranding thousands, including kids.
Thousands of people were stuck in their cars on Highway 26 for as long as 8 hours. Many people abandoned their cars and simply walked home.
Are you judging us Oregonians on how we deal with this situation?
A little bit, but you guys, y'all don't have salt, so makes sense. So you have a hard time driving in this stuff.
And the hills are really bad.
Yeah.
After the mess of that storm, ODOT launched a pilot program testing the use of road salt on certain highways in the metro area.
We've been listening to citizens who complain after virtually every storm where there's any sort of backup. We completely understand and empathize with somebody stuck for 4 to 6 hours out in a mess. Would salt have helped? We don't know, but we're going to find out.
It was not hard to find people in favor,
Yes, please salt the roads. Definitely.
especially after several more storms over the next year left people in their cars stranded for hours. Since then, ODOT and PBOT have used salt in targeted areas. PBOT has an interactive map online. You can see which streets will get salt in the city of Portland. The streets in purple are salt routes. Most of them are in the West Hills, but also a few in East Portland, including 82nd Avenue. Other streets get liquid magnesium chloride or sand. ODOT says road salt is on the table for this storm if conditions call for it. They'll make that decision locally as the storm develops. If it is used, it will be spread on areas on I-5, I-405, I-205, and Highway 26. And that is how we got here. Let us know what you think you should be seeing, what's happening out on the roads. Should the transportation agencies expand the use of road salt to clear the roads during the storms, or do you think the risk to the environment is just too much? You can email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave us a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. Let's change gears here for a moment. Oregon Governor Kate Brown will soon leave office after 7 years of being the state's top elected official. And she served during some of the roughest times in modern history. I recently had a chance to sit down and talk with her about all that. Before we get going, I want to share a few lighter moments, outtakes of what happens behind the scenes. This is the stuff we don't usually show you, but it does happen a lot. I think it's important for you to see what happened in between all the serious parts of this interview.
And I believe that those dollars will go toward preventing the kind of crime that we see in the future.
I have no idea what that means.
I don't either. I just was like, I couldn't think of the bill.
That's okay.
I can't think of another one. Another example off the top of my head. RJC, you guys.
What about marijuana pardons? Is that one?
The Racial Justice Council was fairly adamant that we lost our camera guy.
I think it's still rolling.
Okay, all right, okay. Pat becomes a cameraman. It's still rolling?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Okay. The RJC,
Okay, we're getting close.
I think we're fine. We're okay time-wise, aren't we? Okay. All right.
Then I'll have a sip of water.
Have a sip of water.
Because next, I want to talk about tolling.
Ha!
I don't know if you could tell, but I had a lot of fun interviewing Governor Brown. You know what? She's done her best for us, and I respect that a lot. She also has a great sense of humor that you don't often get to see. Now, let's get to the serious stuff. We did indeed talk about tolling. And there's a lot of concern that once it comes, it will never leave, which I think is probably right, because the Department of Transportation needs to have some money coming into its budget. So, where are you with tolling?
Well, I understand that nobody likes tolling. I am well aware. I don't like it either. But as you just said, it is a key way to pay for the investments we need in infrastructure to get people where they need to go safely. And so the legislature made a decision in the Transportation and Jobs Act of 2017 to move forward with tolling, and I supported that decision. And I think there needs to be two key things that happen as a result. Number one, community engagement. There needs to be more conversation with the communities impacted, for example, West Lynn, because of the Abernathy Bridge. But the second piece, and this is incredibly important, that any type of funding approach has to center equity. We need to make sure that the communities that have been historically disenfranchised, our communities of color, our low-income families, our rural communities, have a voice and are least impacted by this work.
We also talked about mental health. I know that's important to you. I wanted to know if the governor supports building a second state hospital, as many of you have suggested. She began her answer by pointing out that she passed a bill requiring insurance companies to handle mental health conditions the same way they do physical conditions.
It took 10 years for Oregon to pass that bill. That's appalling to me. But at the same time, we were also moving to de-institutionalize folks in institutions. And the goal was to move money from a very large hospital where people would live for months or years to the communities where they would get culturally appropriate care that would best meet their needs.
So you're talking about Damish?
Yes.
And were you a state lawmaker then?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
Because I'm curious, it's hard to find people that will talk through what the decision making
But,
was.
and I don't remember the exact timeline, I'd have to look it up. But the goal in closing Damish was to move resources to the community. But you know what happened. Resources did not go to the community.
Yeah.
So we have struggled in this arena. I'm really pleased to work with legislators like Representative Rob Noce and Senator Kate Lieber. Their work created a $500 million package that we would invest in behavioral health resources in our communities across the state. It would also help, and we are doing this through Future Ready Oregon, invest in training culturally responsive healthcare providers, particularly in the behavioral health space. That is the work we need more of, and that needs to be happening in our communities. Do I think we need more beds? Absolutely, but I'm not sure institutionalization is the way of the future.
What's wrong with that?
It's expensive, and it may not be the best care for individual Oregonians.
I can just hear viewers saying, I'll bet it's better than them living on the street.
Anything's better than folks living on the streets. But we're talking how many folks are on the streets right now in any day throughout the state of Oregon? It's thousands.
It'd be hard to build a hospital that big.
Yes.
Yeah. Governor Brown said she's not sure about whether the bar should be lowered to force more people to get mental health treatment, that she'd want to talk with experts before making up her mind on that one. That's just a snippet of our hour-long conversation, by the way. If you'd like to watch the full interview, you can find it right now on the KGW YouTube channel. Coming up next on The Story, the results are in for the machine recount of Washington's 3rd Congressional District. Republican Joe Kent shelled out nearly $50 grand to ensure his loss to Marie Gluesenkamp Perez was legit. So what do the numbers show, and what does it say about the accuracy of the voting process? We'll break it all down when The Story returns. Tomorrow, the Secretary of State for Washington State is expected to certify the results of a machine recount in the 3rd Congressional District race that pitted Democrat Maurice Gluesenkamp-Perez against Republican Joe Kent. You may remember that Joe Kent's team requested this recount since the margin between the two candidates was not small enough to trigger an automatic recount. Kent was behind by 2,629 votes heading into the recount, and we told you a few weeks ago that the chance of an outcome changing in the race was about as close to impossible as it gets. And that's because of the type of the recount that Kent's team requested. They wanted what's called a machine recount, which does not add up all the votes and count them all again. It only looks at undervotes. And an undervote is when someone did not choose a candidate in a certain race. For example, if someone in Clark County filled out their entire ballot except for the 3rd Congressional District race, that would be considered an undervote for that race. And in this recount, each undervote ballot for the 3rd Congressional District was re-examined to make sure the machine did not miss someone's actual vote. The 3rd Congressional is made up of parts of several different counties, with Clark County being far and away the most populated. And in that county alone, there were only around 2,400 undervotes for the race. So, doing the math, the likelihood of Kent getting all of those votes, plus dozens more from other counties, is just not going to happen. And that's the way it turned out. It did not happen. Here's a look at the breakdown in just Clark County for how the recount affected the vote totals. Maurice Gluesenkamp-Perez gained 7 votes. Joe Kent gained 3 votes. And write-in candidates gained 6 votes. That's not quite the 2,000 plus vote turnaround that Kent needed. And without most, if not all, of the undervotes in Clark County, Kent just had no chance there. In fact, according to a tweet by the campaign manager for Gluesenkamp-Perez, the final vote count across the entire 3rd was a net gain of 4 votes for the Democrat, with Perez gaining 9 of the previous undervotes and Kent gaining just 5. That is a real testament to the accuracy of the elections process and to the workers there, as there were well over 200,000 ballots cast across the district. So well done, everybody. But those final results came at quite a cost to the Kent campaign because they requested the machine recount. They had to put down a deposit of more than $48,000. The exact cost will be determined after the Secretary of State certifies the results tomorrow. When it's all said and done, though, the recount shows Kent lost by more than the original vote count. The Kent campaign sent out this statement early this afternoon after the results were released. It reads in part, "I promised during the campaign that I would accept the outcome of the election, now definitively determined as the recount was concluded. This morning I called my opponent to concede and offer my congratulations on her victory." And that does sound like a nice and honest, respectful gesture in this situation. So you might be thinking, good for you, Joe Kent, for doing that. Although not quite so fast. We talked with the Gluesenkamp-Perez campaign after we saw Kent's statement, and they told us Marie and Joe never actually spoke today. They told us Kent might have tried to call Perez, but he didn't actually get through to her. The Perez campaign said they found out about him conceding the race after seeing him tweet about it. So who knows? But Kent's statement today went on to blame special interest dark money that was spent against him and even lamented about Republican voter turnout, saying they've identified over 81,000 Republicans who simply did not vote and that the GOP must adapt to not lose the turnout battle. Is Joe Kent done with politics? Not likely. He ended his statement with this: "Our campaign is not at a sad end, but a strong beginning. I will have more to say in early January. Rest assured, I'm not done yet." Still to come on the story, the holiday season is here and we're nearly 2 months past the creepy crawlers of Halloween, but tonight we're getting up close and personal with cockroaches. I mean, not live ones, of course, but instead a single creature entombed in amber for millions of years. The minuscule detail discovered inside that's a first of its kind find when the story returns. Well, there's not a ton of people who get excited when they find a cockroach, but believe it or not, there actually are a few. One of them is a professor at Oregon State University, and he's just made a discovery that's at least 20 million years in the making. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has his story.
It was very interesting when we discovered that the cockroaches...
George Poinar has found a lot of firsts encased in amber. The Oregon State professor discovered a new genus of legume preserved in the golden tree resin. He found a parasitic wasp frozen in time next to a flower that science had never seen before. He found the first example of a pine cone, preserved just as it was sprouting. And now, Poinar has discovered a new species of cockroach, plucked from an amber mine in the Dominican Republic after it was encased in resin 20 to 30 million years ago.
Cockroaches aren't that common in amber, and so this was beautifully preserved, and we wanted to study it and describe it.
But it takes more than just finding a piece of amber on the ground to make these kinds of discoveries. Poinar went to the Dominican Republic on an expedition in the 1980s and gathered a number of amber samples from mines on the Caribbean island nation. It sat in his lab among his other amber samples until recently, when he began to process it.
I start off with a saw. I have a little saw that clips the piece, cuts the edges off, and then after that I go to a sander and sand the piece down to the right shape so I can get the right angles, so I can examine the features.
With the help of a cockroach expert, Poinar quickly learned he was looking at a new species.
The coloration of it, this yellow band that went through the center, which seemed to divide the cockroach in two parts. And then there was another crossband, yellow crossband on it too, which was fairly unique in some of the cockroaches.
And there was another intriguing discovery along with this new species, which Poinar named Supella dominicana. It's the first time a fossilized roach has been discovered with intact sperm cells.
And you could actually see the little sperm caps on top of the sperm.
Cockroaches are among the most resilient creatures on Earth. They can withstand hundreds of pounds of pressure and are not easily crushed. Cold doesn't kill them, and some have been observed living for days after being decapitated. And they're fast, too. At maximum scuttle, a cockroach's speed-to-body length ratio is roughly equivalent to a human running at 200 miles per hour. They've also become reviled because they have a habit of traipsing through sewage and decaying meat, then walking over food, spreading disease as they go. Poinar's latest discovery, Supella dominicana, went extinct long ago, and its closest relatives now reside in Africa and Asia. But even with his appreciation for roaches, Poinar said that he's glad the ones he deals with aren't scurrying around his kitchen.
The best place for a cockroach might be in resin.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
So what are you thinking about the story? Would you like to see more like it, or would you rather keep the bugs in their prehistoric prison? Send us an email. We're at thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We're going to wrap things up right after this. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.